Disney Plus brings together fans of all ages. This podcast brings three adults who are also kids at heart together to talk about Disney Plus. Join Scott, the Magic Genie producer, Regina, the sassy Megara of the group, and Nathan, the gentle but grumpy Brit, as they bring you news, reviews, special guests, and discussions on the Disney Plus Streamcast.
Hello and welcome to the Disney Plus Streamcast. I'm Scott Murray and I am here with Nathan Chick, and stepping in for Regina today is my wife, Jennifer Murray. How are you two doing?
Doing well. How are y'all?
You know, everything is just fine and dandy here. It's, another Mother's Day in America. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, Mum. Please forgive me. The card is in the mail. But otherwise, it's great.
Well, the other thing that obviously took place last week and is a big reason for what we're talking about today is last week had Star Wars Day, May the 4th. And of course, if you really go all out, you celebrated Revenge of the 5th. Nathan, did you do anything on May the 4th to kind of mark the day? Did you buy anything or watch anything or do anything on that day?
You know, I feel like kind of a fake then, because every day is a little bit of a Star Wars Day in a way. You know, it's it's prevalent, isn't it? It's kind of, if you're into pop culture, it's just, I think, what you do, it's what you're into, and it's just always around. So for me, my average day when I wake up, I have my AT-AT from back in the day. He's bereft of his guns. I retrieved him last time I went home to England from the attic. He's the original one done by it's like the English version of the Kenner toys that you guys had over here. And he sits on my little bedside table, and I've either got the cat on one side of me and I've got the AT-AT on the other side, just sitting to attention. I wake up and I pet him on the head and I'm like, good boy. And then I go out and have a breakfast. So, you know, nothing in particular other than the stuff we do for the show. But, you know, that's not to say, like the midi-chlorians, it's not always in the blood.
I guess if I went by that, I would say every day's Star Wars Day for me, because I come into my room, or my office, which has a lot of Star Wars stuff in it, but my desk is also a TIE fighter. So I guess in that vein, Star Wars Day is every day for me in that sense, I guess.
Like the sides look like the wings, and I'm trying to envision it. How is it a TIE fighter? Because I'm intrigued.
Well, imagine a TIE fighter landing, well, not a full-size TIE fighter, but a desk-sized TIE fighter landing in your office, and then you just, above the cockpit, you put the platform for where you're going to put your computer and things, and that's how it looks.
Oh my god, I love it.
Yeah,
that's
it's clear glass. It's clear glass along the top, so it looks like when you walk in, you're face on with a TIE fighter. It's pretty cool. Yeah, that's one you need the head honcho CEO power move. It needs to be in the middle of the office. That's not one you can sort of shove up against the wall like I have in my house.
On Star Wars Day here, I actually had something come in the mail that I ordered the week prior, and it just so happened to show up on Star Wars Day, and it's from a company called Yugibo, and they have these furniture products that are both Empire and Rebel. So I picked the Rebel, so it's orange and gray, and then it's got the Rebel insignia on it. And I got this full-size one, so it's like a beanbag, but it's very it's more rectangle than round. It's very rectangle, and in fact, it's like a long rectangle. And you can lay on it like a bed. You can also curve it up like a video game chair, or you can actually just kind of sit into it, and it will create a chair too. So, I mean, you can have a chair of any kind and kind of a bed of any kind. It's great. I really, it's one of those things you see it online and you think, man, I hope it's that easy and it's comfortable, and it really is. And then Jen, her company had a Star Wars trivia contest, and she won it.
I did. Well, by 1 point. I might have had some help, but I did most of it on my own.
She did do most of it. I'd say she did about 90% of it. And the prize was she was allowed to order anything she wanted Star Wars related within $20 on Amazon. So we ordered 2 Mandalorian Funko Pops. We ordered Quill,
yes,
and the Child.
Fair play. Well, good for you guys. What a lovely way to celebrate. That's really nice.
Yeah. It was fun.
All right, well, let's get this Star Wars show on the road. Before we get into our major Star Wars topics, let's talk about news.
That's right. It's time for news with me, Nathan.
It's time for news with Nathan, and thank goodness we already knew he was here.
As you mentioned, May the 4th. That's a big deal for all the Star Wars fans out there. And they did save a couple of interesting news bits for May the 4th. And I think some of this had been maybe hinted at, or there was some speculation about this before in the past, and Homeboy had always denied it, but they actually came out on the StarWars.com website. Also, I think Variety confirmed that Taika Waititi is directing and co-writing a new Star Wars feature film for theatrical release, working on the screenplay with Christy Wilson Cairns, who did 1917. I think she got nominated for an Academy Award for that.
That was great. I love 1917. That was
a good movie.
Something else that makes you glad to be a fan is that they confirmed that Tamira Morrison, who played Jango Fett, he's coming back as Boba Fett.
Do we know that for sure? Because I've seen some people say that people are jumping to conclusions that he's Boba Fett when he could also just as easily be Rex.
See, now what I had seen, and you'll have to indulge me with this, because typically if it's not on Deadline or Variety, I don't mention it. But I had seen that it was Boba Fett, but not necessarily in the current timeline, or like in this sort of where they are. It could have been a flashback or something other, because he's like 60 years old in real life now, and now obviously he's underneath the helmet, and maybe he's coming back just to do the voice. I mean, who knows? Also, on Deadline this week, they interviewed Dave Filoni about all the stuff that's coming up, and as well as the finale of Clone Wars. We're not going to talk about any of that in spoilers, because I know we haven't even got to it yet. One of these days, we'll cover it on the show, I'm sure. But what I did like is that they got to talk about Rebels a little bit, and Sabine's story arc, which was left unfinished. He left it hanging on purpose. He really didn't want to end it, per se, as much as he wanted to leave the story hanging out there so he could do something with it later on, and who knows where your imagination goes. And he said it is something that he's I guess, put some thought into. Like, he has an idea of where that's going and what happens to Sabine and the Darksaber. And who knows when and if he'll get the time to do something with that. But he's definitely got plans for it. And being that Dave Filoni seems to be the golden child for Lucasfilm right now, I fully imagine he's going to get that opportunity. Anyway, that's up on Deadline, and it's a really good read. It's kind of fun. Something else I saw as far as Mandalorian merch goes, the child has a cereal deal. Scott, I remember back in the days, we bonded over a box of Lucio O's from Overwatch. And anyway, coming out later this year, General Mills is bringing out the child cereal. It's sweetened corn puffs, so corn pops essentially, with green, can you say Yoda-shaped, child-shaped marshmallows. So it's probably terrible for you, but it's the best bit of Lucky Charms with corn pops. So, look forward to that coming out soon. This week as well, we had Walt Disney Television actually did a town hall, the first time they've ever done one of those since the merger with Fox, and that comes in the wake of the earnings call they had earlier this week. And so basically it was Peter Rice, the chairman of Walt Disney Television, going on about everything that's going on with the studio right now, their successes and failings as they might see them. And well, I suppose Disney went and reported losses of $1.4 billion last week, because obviously their experience business is down the proverbial gutter right now. It's, they haven't got parks open or any of those things, or the cruises. The television group is actually doing really, really well for them. The media network's revenues for the quarter rose 28%, and operating income increased 7%. And so they're pretty bullish about what they have in the pipeline, as well as because they've got things like, even though they're coming to an end, like Modern Family and Homeland, and they've had series that have been really, really positive for them, and they're really confident they can continue with that kind of creative bent and still be the top network on TV, or at least with ABC. The program they featured the most and that they love to talk about, Disney Family Sing-Along. It's not my thing, but apparently the one they had earlier on today was really good as well. So people are saying Katy Perry breaking the internet, dressing up in a costume of Dumbo's mama, singing Baby Mine to the unborn baby in her tummy with Orlando Bloom, I guess. They're getting all shacked up and everything. And people were saying, oh my gosh, did you see it? No, I didn't, and I won't. But you could probably on Disney Plus, because they're streaming the last one and the new one's probably going to hit this week. And if this whole pandemic thing continues, there's probably more of those. So what a relief. Just when you thought,
Isn't this the one I heard that Kermit and Miss Piggy were opening one of the Disney Family sing-alongs? I don't know if it was this week or a prior week, but I heard that the Muppets were coming on one of them to do a segment. Isn't that enough to intrigue you, Scott, to watch one of them?
No.
Okay, well,
you hammering that fast forward all the way through.
And I am.
I am fond of a Muppet, but not as fond as you are, sir.
A lot of people say that.
Yeah. As far as parks go for Disney, they are starting to take reservations at Disney World from July 1st. Doesn't actually have a reopening date, but they are taking reservations that you can cancel or modify depending on when they open or not. So they're foreseeing that happening in the not too distant future. Also, Disney Shanghai, they have to have some pretty strict distancing rules in place there. There's also a capacity limit. They're saying 30,000. That's what the Chinese officials have asked for. Disney have said they're not even going as that high to begin with until they iron out all the kinks and get people where they need to be doing what they need to do. You have to have temperature screening at the gate, proper distance while waiting in lines for rides and restaurants, skipping every other row in the rides, hand sanitizer stations at the restaurant and stores. They're only saying tickets online only have specific dates and entrance times. They've also said as well that characters in the suits, they can still interact with folks, because the thought is that the suit acts kind of like a mask or a covering and prevents spread to some degree. Characters that are what they call face characters, like your princesses, they'll perform from a distance. They won't be up close and personal. They have also announced, though, that for the while they're closing a lot of the other attractions that are in that park, such as the theatre shows, the children's play areas. They've also taken out the nighttime spectaculars and some of those other pieces to avoid crowding. If you go to that, we've mentioned this before, hashtag Disney Magic Moments online, you will find that Disney on their blog is highlighting the best bits of the park, just to kind of get you in the mood. A couple of recipes on there I noticed, because I like to cook, I like food. Have you seen me? I'm the size of a house. They have recipes on there for the grey stuff. It's delicious. As well as,
believe me, ask the dishes.
There you go. And the Tonga toast as well from the Polynesian resort. They had the recipe on that for make for your Mum on Mother's Day and all the rest of that stuff. Also, I don't know if you noticed, Scott, they had as part of the Disney Magic Moments, they had Kermit doing an acoustic Rainbow Connection out in the swamp as part of that. It's the first thing they posted on the old Muppets YouTube for a while there. But there's life in the old dog, yeah. I mean, it's a classic song.
It is.
So that was cool. Sometimes I find when I'm bored on buses, don't ask, I like to try and do the Kermit voice and see if I can get it right, just for those lines, that opening couplet. And I don't do anything else. I don't know why it's important to me. I just hear it and it just takes me somewhere. That why are there so many? Like I hear that and I'm just like, oh yeah, I got to get into it, and I'm not into it anymore. Don't ask. I have no idea. Other things that I have no idea about. This apparently is a good idea. National Treasure getting a series on Disney Plus, a spin-off on the Nicolas Cage movie. Okay, Jerry Bruckheimer. That's cool. Apparently it's a kid's version. I didn't know that we needed any more of that, even though Nicolas Cage is really memeable these days. But there's that coming. And in other Disney Plus news, Just Beyond, the series, I guess the comic series that was done by R.L. Stine, the guy who did Goosebumps, that's getting a show. Seth Grahame-Smith, who is the guy who most recently, I guess, he executive produced the It movies, but he's also done those Pride and Prejudice and Zombies books that were quite popular. He's going to write that, and you can expect that at some point on your telly next year on Disney Plus. Nice. And guys, that's what I got.
Okay, well, it's time to get into some discussions about Star Wars, specifically the first episode of the Mandalorian documentary, and looking back on The Empire Strikes Back 40 years later.
That's next on the Disney Plus Streamcast.
Okay, well, before we get into our discussion about The Empire Strikes Back, which is celebrating its 40th anniversary, don't have to bring that up a lot today.
Makes you feel old, doesn't it?
It does. But before we get into that, the first episode of the Mandalorian documentary series came out, and it really focused on the directors, and the directors sitting around a table and telling some stories about their involvement and their pathway to get to do this, and then a little bit about their directing styles and seeing them all interacting on set for the different episodes that they worked on. What did you all think of that? What did you all think of the very first episode?
Let's preface this by saying it's definitely a puff piece, like so many of the Disney behind-the-scenes bits are. And as you know, in the past, when we've talked about these things, I've been a bit critical. But then again, I get it on the media synergy and all the rest of it. It was never going to be a warts and all sort of thing. Although I bet there's some crazy stories about how they pulled off some of that stuff there, which you hope will come out later on. But the thing that I think was most engaging to me is just seeing the genuine passion for some of those folks about Star Wars and, what they love about it. I watched the first 2 episodes, and so some of this is kind of like a blended in a little bit for me. So I hope I'm not ruining any of that. But like we mentioned earlier, Dave Filoni, like his passion, if you've never seen him talk about Star Wars, it's an awesome thing to experience. I mean, Favreau is doing his thing, he's probably a little pretentious. He's probably the most experienced dude there. And, he's just kind of like navigating the discussion, and the rest kind of feel like how you'd expect them to. So Taika Waititi is a little bit off the wall. Okay. He's fun, but you kind of knew what you were getting with him. And Dallas Bryce Howard is just a bit Hollywood and kind of is a little bit, she's in the business, so no doubt she's got the chops, but it just seems like she's just happy to be there and doesn't actually kind of speak with passion about it. When Dave Filoni speaks about Star Wars, I listen, and that's the best way I can put it. He's just so compelling when he talks about his journey into that, and also just how he feels about it. When he was, again, you have to slap me if I get this wrong, is the first episode or the second episode, he's talking about the journey of hope and the stuff that George Lucas told him about Star Wars, about why it was important and the messages he had to convey. Oh my God, it was amazing. I just loved it. I was rapt. It was fantastic. So it's worth watching just for that.
Yeah, Dave Filoni definitely comes across as a little bit as the everyman, the every Star Wars fan, because he knows so much. He embodies the passion that so many Star Wars fans have for the story and the lore. But what I found most interesting, we've only watched the first episode, and coming from a business angle, this is always how I go. But it was so interesting to watch how Jon Favreau kind of engineered the group and kind of moved the discussion, but yet at the same time, when I was looking at all the people there, I mean, not only did he have diversity represented, which I thought was kind of cool, but just their approaches and how they all made those episodes. And then when you hear them talk about which person had which episode, it was interesting to see kind of their style and their approach. Bryce Dallas Howard was definitely kind of an actor's director, and how really the character development in the particular episode she was working on was so critical, because a couple of the scenes, I think she was the one that did correct me if I'm wrong, the episode where they go and they're helping out the village that's getting attacked. And that's so right. It was very character driven and very intense in those experiences, and you can kind of see kind of her approach coming out in that episode. And then there's Deborah Chow, who has a very measured approach and tries to she's very efficient and very effective in trying to get the most done in the time allotment that she's got, and just how her action scenes and I guess the fight scenes play out in the episode. I think she did more than one episode. So I thought it was a cool episode, because it was just kind of getting to sit in and be a fly on the wall of this discussion, even though it is a little glossy and a little Disney, but that's to be expected.
I thought it was interesting. I can definitely appreciate the different things that each director brought to each episode. And like you said, Nathan, I think the thing that really stands out is just how much people love the franchise. And then Dave is just like the quintessential Star Wars nerd that also, understands why things are told the way they are, and why things play the way they do, and why people do certain things and why certain characters do certain things. And that deep knowledge that, and he kind of alluded to this, that, if you were just kind of talking amongst friends, everybody would be like, good grief, you're deep with this stuff, aren't you? But when you get dropped into an opportunity where you're actually able to be part of the storytelling, that's extremely valuable. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And some of the stories he talked about, especially when he thought he was being pranked when Lucasfilm called him,
that was hilarious.
He thought because people made so much fun of him at times, playfully about his nutty passion for Star Wars. He thought, they were pretending to be Lucasfilm calling him for a job. So, and then they were like, we thought you were the guy. And then when he realized it was really them, he was like, oh no, I really am the guy. I am very much the guy. I wasn't really, at least in that episode, obviously nearly as invested in, as found it as compelling as like building an empire. But I think those will come in the rest of the episodes. It's a tough call for me sometimes to watch this stuff. I mean, I'm interested, but sometimes I worry that if I get too in the weeds with how they did everything and watch everything behind the scenes, it kind of takes away from, I don't want it to be, almost disconnecting me from being immersed in it, because I'm too busy thinking, oh, this is when they were, I bet they did this for this scene. And, I've seen this cockpit before that they're flying in on the set. I don't want to be thinking about that stuff when I'm watching the show. So,
but the interesting thing that I find out about that I thought was interesting, I guess one of them had made the comment about how it was nice to have all of these group of directors to go as a resource and stuff. And I half wonder if that played a strong role in why The Mandalorian turned out as well as it did, because you have Filoni, who's playing kind of the role of the expert. And then you have like Bryce Dallas Howard, who plays the role of kind of eliciting the emotional beats from an actor's perspective. And you've got, Deborah Chow, who's kind of the taskmaster and trying to help get things done and get things done quickly and efficiently, and how they kind of relied on each other, and how that may have played a role in why all of the episodes to me were, some of them were stronger than others, but I don't think there was one that was weak per se in the entire series. And I think that's what made it so strong as a whole.
Okay. That is the present. Let's talk a little bit about the past. One of the big themes of this year's Star Wars Day was the 40th anniversary of The Empire Strikes Back. In fact, I guess one of the reasons why ShopDisney.com crashed was because so many people were trying to get Empire Strikes Back stuff, among other things. New Empire Strikes Back stuff. It's interesting to look at this. Honestly, if you've listened to the show, you would know that I'll probably be a little more excited about something like that happening in 2023 for Return of the Jedi, because that's my favorite of the group. I thought we could start off, if you remember when you went to go see this, or when you saw it for the first time. I don't fully remember everything as vividly as I do for Jedi as a kid, because by the time I saw Jedi, I was 10, so I was 7 when Empire came out, although I do remember being excited for Empire, and I remember my parents hearing, it's a little dark, So there was talk amongst them early on as to whether or not they may have to go see it first without me before we see it, because they heard it's dark, which totally freaked me out as a kid, that my parents would be sitting in the theater with a Star Wars movie and I wouldn't be there. Fortunately, they didn't do that. And then, of course, the thing I remember is twofold. I remember just the fascination being a Luke Skywalker guy, watching him evolve into this Jedi, and I love the fact that he was not afraid to get in Darth Vader's face and just fight him. I loved that about Luke. Despite the fact that Obi-Wan and Yoda were telling him, don't do it, you're not ready. I just loved the fact that he wasn't afraid of him. At least he didn't seem to be. He was willing to go up there and show he could do it. And as we know, his father was like that too, and made that mistake with Count Dooku and others. And I, of course, remember, obviously, the reveal. I was very much in the same boat with Luke. I was like, okay, he's lying. He's not telling him the truth. This can't be right. And it's funny. There's a great scene in The Big Bang Theory when Sheldon goes out and has this full day hanging out with James Earl Jones, and they have this really hilarious discussion about that reveal. James Earl Jones even says, I thought he was lying. And then Sheldon goes, but he wasn't, was he? And James Earl Jones goes, he was not. How screwed up is that? It's such a great episode of that show. Then they ring Carrie Fisher's doorbell and run off and get her all ticked off. I remember that. And then perfectly as a kid, watching them rescue Luke at the end, Lando and Chewie getting in the Falcon saying, we're going to go get Han, and they fly off, and that's where they leave it. And I just remember like, holy crap, how are they going to get him? Where's he going? Where's Boba Fett taking him? I mean, that just made my anticipation for Jedi through the roof, but I was still conflicted because I was like, okay, clearly it's true, because that you see Darth Vader talking to Luke Skywalker there at the very end when he's laying in the Falcon. It's like, okay, he really is his father. And I just remember as a kid, as a 7-year-old going, how's this guy going to fight his dad?
I did see Empire Strikes Back in the movie theater. Shockingly, I remember more, and it's probably because my dad tells me the stories. I remember more about A New Hope, because we actually saw it on opening day at North Park 1 and 2 in Dallas, which is torn down and no longer exists. But I was a few years older than Scott going in to see Empire Strikes Back. So I was 11, I think, at the time. I liked it, but it's not my favorite. And part of it is because I don't like darker things. But for me, as an 11-year-old, I was totally in love with Han Solo. So when he ended up in the carbonite, it about freaked my world out. And I was just distraught and upset. And then you leave it on a cliffhanger. You don't know what's going to happen to him. So while my mind was blown that Darth Vader was Luke's father, it was more of the Han and carbonite that threw me for a loop more than anything. And that's the thing that's most memorable in my head, because I didn't like that particular component of it. I honestly didn't see Empire Strikes Back in the movie theater as much as I saw A New Hope and Return of the Jedi.
I never got to see Empire in the movie theater. I guess English release dates, I think, were a little bit behind American release dates. It wouldn't have mattered. I would have been 2 or 3 when that movie came out. And I tell you, what I remember about Empire is when I was a kid and, Jedi came out, and being hyped for Jedi, and people saying, you won't get it because you haven't watched, the Empire. But I had read, I guess, the comic book adaptation by then, and I was familiar with the toys, and again, we talk about those childhood experiences that kind of condition you, and they kind of make you develop in a certain way. What I remember about Empire is that all my toys at the time were Jedi toys. I had the black garbed Luke with the green lightsaber, and I had speeder bikes, and I had Endor Leia, and all those things. And I remember saying to my mum, I have to get the Empire Strikes Back toys because I don't have any of those. And I remember going to the Woolworths in Bristol. I remember how dark the shelves were. It wasn't really well lit, but I remember it was the best toy store in downtown Bristol. And I remember looking at those carded figures. They were done by Palatoy, but again, based on Kenner molds, but they were made in England. And I remember that the 2 I picked out were Bespin Luke and the Hoth Han Solo
Mm-hmm.
with his like little parka and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I wanted a parka like that when I was a kid, and my mum found one. I was like, you know, I was bounding or cosplaying then, you know, I guess. And I still have that Luke, that original Luke. His head's broken off, and I glued it back on. But I have the lightsaber and I have the blaster, and he's still on a little stand in my action figure curio thing. Like, I only keep a few of them out at any given time, and I still keep them out because he was my favorite figure for so long. But I didn't actually get to watch the movie until my dad got a pirated copy from a friend that on VHS back in the day. Like, after I'd already watched Jedi. My dad was a bit of a dodgy bloke once upon a time, and he knew all sorts of characters, if you will, and you know, used to frequent those hives of scum and villainy. And yeah, he got it for me because he knew I really enjoyed. You know, I watched Jedi and I watched Caravan of Courage, and I was like, oh yeah, Star Wars is the best, based on Caravan of Courage. And
That's funny.
He was like, oh, I found this for you and you should watch it. And then it all kind of clicked, it all made sense because I'd only ever seen depictions of it or heard about it before and saw toys. And so yeah, it was kind of like a revelatory thing, tell you the truth. I remember like, whoa, even with the grainy quality and the sound bars across the screen, it was still an amazing experience.
I mean, yeah, there were some cool toys that came from Empire. And, you know, a lot of that, of course, was rooted in the very first place we go. You know, you think about the options that George had to create planet environments. We'd already been to a place that's full of sand and heat. So they go to the other extreme and they do, you know, the snow planet. And then, of course, in Jedi, it's the forest moon. But, I mean, gosh, talk about real peril to open that scene up. You immediately see that Star Destroyer firing those pods down with the Imperial probe droids on it. And it really, you know, considering how much time had probably passed, I mean, you knew as a fan they were clearly going to have to move their base out of Yavin. So it was kind of interesting to see what was happening. And then, gosh, there was so much that happened. I mean, there's so much gravity in what happened just in that first scene on Hoth. I mean, you had everything from, you know, the threat of freezing to death and the Tauntauns freezing to death and the ice monster and the Imperial probe droid, and then it all caps off with the AT-ATs. And remember what that was, you know, seeing those things for the first time. And then the really cool snow speeders. I think the snow speeders are some of the coolest vehicles that the Rebels had. I mean, you can't take anything away from the X-Wings, but man, those snow speeders were cool too. And just the idea that you just couldn't, in typical sci-fi fashion, fly by and just take them out, and that was going to be enough, that you had to come up with creative ways to take them down, including those tow cables. And, you know, you almost start to get kind of deep about it. You're like, wow, thank goodness they had ships on that ice planet that had tow cables. You know, because if they'd all been X-Wings, they wouldn't have been able to take those things down. So it just seemed kind of fortuitous that it just so happens that these vehicles they have on Hoth have the ability to fire these things up that can wrap a cable around the legs of an AT-AT. But man, what a great scene that was. It was a heck of a way to start off that second movie. When I think of Empire, that's the first thing I think about. And I don't know if it's just because that's the beginning. It doesn't take too long before I'm thinking about Yoda and asteroids and Cloud City and Boba Fett, but I generally always think about Hoth first. I mean, it was that impactful.
I mean, it is memorable because, I mean, it's just nothing but white. But the thing that it always makes me think of also is the video game where we played at the arcade, Scott, where you're in the snow speeder and you're doing the tow cables around the AT-AT, because it was such a cool scene. Having that experience of doing it.
I think you got to do that sort of thing. Was it the Nintendo game Rogue Squadron? I think you got to fly a little snow speeder and you had to correctly tag it. And then if you didn't do a perfect circle, it would detach and you'd have to start all over again.
When you see Luke first get behind, I guess, get in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon, you know, you see him as a gunner. And you hear him say, like, yeah, I got one. And Han says, yeah, don't get cocky, kid. And, you know, like, he's exuberant, and they fend off these ties, and there's, like, some danger, but not really, because they've got it handled. When you see Luke flying in the snow speeder, the first thing that happens is that his co-pilot, Dad, gets shot. He dies.
Yeah.
You know? It's like you get staked straight away. It's like what was familiar is kind of turned on its head a little bit, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, this is like a different story beat. Like, you're not really expecting that. And that was really kind of apparent to me. I remember watching it the first time. It was like this isn't the same. You know, I've seen like people spill like Tauntaun spill their guts. I've seen people in jeopardy, and all of a sudden like there's someone like dead who we know, or like a rebel guy like in the first part of the movie, and you're like, this isn't going to end up like the last one. You know, this is going somewhere else. You know, you always expect people to die in the epic battle, but at the beginning, you don't die at the beginning. It kind of puts a different sort of like a more personal sort of like spin on it, and I really enjoyed that.
Well, I mean, you know, and it just goes to the point of, you know, that's the start of building this story. It's like the act 2, because the situation has to be so dire so that the payoff in Jedi is that much sweeter, that the good triumphs over evil. I mean, it just, even at the beginning of the movie, I mean, it just starts off, like you said, it's not the same movie as A New Hope, and that you have to create the circumstances have to be even more dire and more important, ending with so little hope. You know, Han's in carbonite and Luke's Darth Vader's son, which is just crazy. And, you know, he's hanging on the thing in Cloud City, and everybody just doesn't seem like there is no hope of being able to win.
Right, because that's the other thing I think that's really important about that, when you say about the whole Darth and Luke thing. With A New Hope, you see Vader as he's like a henchman to Grand Moff Tarkin, and he's powerful, but he's kind of not calling the shots. He's sort of been told what to do. Other people are in charge, and it's very much the Empire versus the Rebel Alliance. Whereas at the beginning of Empire, when you see Vader on the bridge, he's saying, I need to find Skywalker. It's the Empire against Luke Skywalker. They're going to find him. But come hell or high water, they're looking for him. Probe droids and all the landing craft and everything, they're coming for Luke. And the Rebel base is a nice bonus. But he explicitly says, Skywalker, I want to find him. And again, you get an idea of the stakes. It's like, it's a bit more treacherous, like from the get-go. And no matter how much comic relief you get in there with Han and Leia, with their flirting, will they, won't they? It's still like something that's kind of like looming the whole time. This like specter of, of the Imperials. It's a scary old thing. And I feel they set that up really, really nicely.
I mean, I think Empire is definitely the film out of the three where Vader is the most imposing, because like you said, he is on that mission. You see him kill a couple of his own soldiers, choking them to death. He's in his chamber. That chamber's iconic place. You see him talk to the Emperor. We see the Emperor for the first time. Well, at least we saw him as one actor at one point in time, and then we saw him as Ian McDiarmid later. Even in Hoth, I mean, shoot, how many times during those assaults is Vader coming down there to while the battle's taking place, with the snowtroopers there to do what he needs to do, and of course he gets there to see the Millennium Falcon fly away and get away again. But he was definitely the most imposing because, really in Jedi, it was all about the Emperor, really, and the Emperor telling him what he needs to do. And then a lot of the rest of the movie was about that inner conflict he had. And Luke was very correct to say, you weren't able to kill him before, and I don't think you're going to do it now. Do you remember the whole experience of Yoda for the first time, meeting Yoda for the first time, landing on Dagobah for the first time, this swamp planet with lots of snakes, and then of course the cave scene? I don't remember a whole lot of that. I just remember, the fun little twist where Yoda's acting like Fozzie for the first part of it, or Grover, and then all of a sudden getting all serious to go, oh no, I'm the Jedi Master and you're not ready. And I remember, as a kid too, when him and Obi-Wan are telling Luke, don't go. I'm sitting here thinking, dude, go. I wanted to see Luke swoop in and rescue Han and Leia, or do whatever he was thinking he was going to do, and maybe face Darth Vader. I just always thought that one of the cooler things, longer story-wise, was Vader never seemed to remember or think about Yoda. It was always, Obi-Wan taught you well. Obi-Wan can't help you. He never considered that it might be somebody else that's training him. Do you remember a whole lot about Yoda? I mean, I remember becoming a instant fan and wanting an action figure. I also had a puppet, a little hand puppet of Yoda.
I remember being intrigued with Yoda, and I do remember him sounding like Grover to me.
Well, there's a reason for that.
Yeah, there is a reason for that. And I thought he was cool and even provided some lightheartedness for a very serious movie. So that's mainly what I remember.
I wonder if I would have enjoyed Yoda so much
if you hadn't seen him die first and then go back.
For example, if you look at Jedi and you look at Salacious Crumb, for example, you look at the Ewoks, those you've got those kind of like cutesy, Muppet characters in there, and that kind of made it palatable to me. As an older fan, I don't know how they would feel about Yoda watching that for the first time. Like, I wonder if you had somebody who hadn't experienced Star Wars, and there are some people out there, I guess, who haven't, if they came to Empire, just looking at the original trilogy, they've gone from Star Wars, gone to Empire, if they would take Yoda seriously. And I realized that that's the kind of the point, in that, Luke is looking for like this mighty warrior, this great Jedi Knight, and instead he finds Yoda, who is a great Jedi Knight, but he defies your expectations. Yeah, I mean, I like Yoda. I love Yoda. That how you get so big eating food of this kind and all that stuff. I mean, I love the lines. I mean, Frank Oz, how could you not? But definitely, I think it's a little bit of a turn. If you were expecting a conventional sort of space opera, if you are maybe you were into your books back in the day, your Frank Herberts, your Robert Heinlein's, Dune, Starship Troopers, Flash Gordon, all of that. And then we give you Yoda. I wonder how that makes a lot of people feel. I just wonder about the kind of cognitive dissonance that goes on with that. Like, this isn't in my space epic. I'm glad it's there. It makes sense to me now. It made sense to me then as a kid. But I would be curious to find out if that struck somebody the wrong way and that kind of just turned them off, like animatronics. No, I'm out. More spaceships, please. I wonder.
Well, I think too, I mean, Yoda is very much a thematic element for George Lucas, because he always, through all of his stories, it's the unlikeliest of characters that sometimes play the biggest roles. And I think that's been kind of an ongoing thing, like the Ewoks, how they play the role in Jedi, and that they're these cute little fuzzy characters, but yet they play a very important role and are heroes in Jedi. Same way with Yoda. He's totally unsuspecting. You think this little green creature that makes all these noises. Yeah. And, he's arguably one of the greatest Jedi that ever existed. So in other movies in the series, there are other characters along the way that play important roles, critical roles or heroic roles in some regards that you don't expect.
The Empire Strikes Back also has one of my favorite themes from John Williams, and that's the chase through the asteroid field. I love that music, and I love that scene. It's so fun. It was so imaginative, especially back in 1980, to be watching a chase like that in space, where you've not only got to navigate the elements, and you get that great iconic line from Han about never tell me the odds, and you've got these TIE fighters that, Darth Vader, they know you do not want to go back and tell Darth Vader you did not take down the Millennium Falcon or capture it. So you're going to have to go into that asteroid field. And, you've got this, the Falcon doing its thing full speed. You've got these TIE fighters that are trying to navigate everything, and some of them don't make it. And then, of course, we get that scene where they fly in and they think they're in a cave, and out they come out of the cave, and it's actually a slug living inside the cave. I mean, that to me too is another just amazing element of imagination. You could have just stopped at, they went inside, a cave inside of an asteroid like they did in The Last Starfighter. But no, we had them go in and they're actually in the stomach of a slug with Minox in its throat. So, it really was. They really did go all out in that whole scene. And then, of course, eventually we leave there and go to Cloud City. But the asteroid field, I think, is another very iconic part of the film.
Here's the thing. I love the music and I love the chase. Rewatching that movie, though, the other day, it's 2 hours long, which is a long one for a movie done in the 80s. When I think about all the great bits that make up Empire, the bit with the Exegorth, the bit with the space slug, that's the one bit that I could cut and just be like, movie still kind of plays the same.
But if they hadn't done that, I would not have a Jack in the Box box in my office right now. That when you turn when you turn the handle, a slug pops out of it.
And the merchandise is very important, Nathan. We must note that.
Oh, you know it. I'm not going to knock it. Say Toyetic is my middle name. I just as I say, I do enjoy it. The Star Wars, and it doesn't matter what it is, even the Phantom Menace. I mean, I'll talk smack all day long, but I'd still rather watch it than have the stuff that's on TV, given the opportunity. Oh, this one won BAFTAs, yeah, but Star Wars, I've got no problem saying that. I'm just a big old nerd, and that's just it's in my blood. I can't help it. I just wonder though, like pacing wise, it's like everything is like so. It goes on at a feral clip. It bounces around all over the place, and the action is like non-stop, and it's great. And then they're in the cave for a bit, and I don't really get the tension the same way. Yes. And it's weird.
I agree, because that's actually been one of the challenges for me when I talk about it not being my favorite, is the rewatchability. I'm not suggesting at all, like you said, it's Star Wars, you're going to watch it, but that is so true. That's been my problem, and I guess maybe part of that is the challenge of being someone who's watched it so many darn times. You just know what's coming. It's not like watching it that first time. And yeah, I do find myself in that movie getting anxious for some of my more favorite moments. I'm ready to get off of Dagobah and into the asteroid field. I'm ready to get out of the asteroid field and to Cloud City. I don't really have, obviously, a whole lot of that when they're on Hoth, because Hoth, like we said, is, the whole situation is brutal from the beginning. But from that point on, there's a lot that happens. They're just floating around in space. Han and Leia are doing their thing. Luke and Yoda are doing their thing. And you really got to wait for everything to come to a head in Cloud City. And, I was talking about Vader being imposing. I mean, how about that moment? You want to talk about a reveal? How about watching Empire for the first time, and Lando and Han are hanging out and they're having all this fun, and he goes, "I've just made a deal that'll keep the Emperor out of here for a long time," and he opens that door and there's Darth Vader sitting on the end of that table. Han pulls his blaster, fires a couple of shots. Vader blocks it with his hand and then uses the Force to pull that out of Han Solo's hand. And the next thing you know, Boba Fett and stormtroopers are surrounding the whole team, and they got to go in there. Imagine have you ever wondered what that conversation was like once that door closed? They all have to go in there and sit with Darth Vader and all these stormtroopers and talk about who knows what. Man, I mean, to me, that's also got to be one of the most powerful scenes in the whole movie.
Yeah, that was for lack of a better term, that was an oh shit moment for me when you see Darth Vader there. And again, I mean, I was so mad. I remember, at 10 or 11 years old, the level of sophistication isn't totally there, but that's part of the reason why I never was a huge fan of Lando, is because he totally sold out his buddy to Darth Vader. And so
now you talk to Billy D, he doesn't agree with you.
Yeah, I know. But I was so mad in that movie, and then you see Darth Vader there, and again, it sets up the whole, the seriousness and the gravity of the situation, and oh God, how are they going to get out of this? What's going to happen? What's going to happen to everybody? Your people that you like so much, Luke, Han, and Leia. What's going to happen to them?
Did you ever see the Robot Chicken sketch?
Yeah,
Pray I don't change the
altar.
Yes. Pray I don't alter the deal again. Yes.
Yeah, and Han Solo asking for a little more water, and Vader shouting at him, and they're giving each other the finger across the table. And Lando, what was it, like that joke he says, "Hey, I got a joke. He's got two thumbs and betrayed his best friend. This guy." just love it. Like that was done with such love. People who really enjoy that movie, and just said, like you said, Scott, what would they say around that table? It was beautifully done.
Well, as this thing comes together, all of this, as Nathan was talking about in the beginning, was to lure Luke Skywalker there. And the original plan, of course, was to put Luke in the carbonite and bring him to the Emperor. And then when Lando goes, "Oh, well, it might kill him," he goes, "All right, well, let's test it first on Han Solo." We've already kind of talked about how, that was a tough scene. Of course, we all think about "I Love You, I Know," which originally was "I Love You Too." And Harrison Ford was the one who just thought, that's not what this guy would say. So he just decided to say "I know," which does seem to be a lot more Han Solo-esque in a lot of ways. But then we get that first real fight between Luke and Vader. And it had everything it needed to have. Because as a fan, I loved Luke even got a couple of hits on Vader and surprised him a couple of times. Even when Vader says all too easy, Luke comes jumping out of the chamber and they continue to fight and almost kind of chase each other for a moment. But it's when they get in that room and Vader's able to just put his, kind of move the saber down and just start throwing things at him. Holy crap, that's when you start to realize, yeah, this guy is way more advanced than Luke, even though Luke is willing to get in his face and fight him. And then we have the reveal. And then we get a little bit of foreshadowing, as Jen pointed out earlier, after he's found out that Vader is his father and he decides to make that leap all the way down the shaft. And oh my gosh, I'm willing to accept some things in the special editions, but I hate the fact that they added Luke going, ah. It was so much more dramatic to me, not making any noise as he went down that shaft, and all we're hearing is John Williams' music and Vader looking a little disappointed that he couldn't get Luke to join the dark side at that moment. But then we get that foreshadowing too, that he's hanging there on that on the outside and has nowhere to go. Ben can't help him, but somehow he calls to Leia and she hears him. And I remember as a kid going, whoa, what's happening there? How is it that Leia can hear him calling all the way out there? So that's how things kind of, wrap up, along with Lando saying he's going to go track down Han and the bounty hunter, which totally leaves you in suspense as a fan. What about the way this thing ends? That fight between Luke and Vader, and then Leia, sensing him, hearing him, picking him up, and then where things end in the film.
Well, I mean, for the time and in that moment, not knowing what happened, where Darth Vader really comes from, I mean, it just solidified about how, truly, I think that was one of the times when it solidifies he's one of the greatest villains of all time. I mean, how can you look at your own son and have a fight with him and cut off his arm and,
just
try and turn him to the dark side, or his hand, sorry. But I find it ironic that now, having seen the other movies and where Darth Vader came from and being Anakin Skywalker, who was the biggest hothead of his time, and how he developed into Darth Vader, where he was totally in control of his emotions and his anger and that sort of thing. And then here you have Luke that's an emotional, I think it was the emotion too that was the big differentiator in that conflict, because Vader appealed to his emotion and his emotion overrode him, and he, I think that was a big factor in that fight. But I just find it ironic that Anakin was just as bad, if not worse, than Luke was. I mean,
Luke had just as much in him, I think, to not only a little bit angry, especially at in Bespin, where he knew that he was there torturing and hurting his friends. There was that aspect of it, and just trying to maybe prove to himself, and maybe even to some degree prove to Yoda and Obi-Wan he is ready to face Vader, and he just wasn't. And yeah, Vader, when he was Anakin, made that same mistake a few times.
Going back to the beginning of that bit with Han and Leia with I love you, I know. Watching that again since, I guess, that Carrie Fisher autobiography came out, where she said that, she had a tryst with Harrison Ford back in the day when they were filming. Mm-hmm. She was a 19-year-old starlet who was completely obsessed with Harrison Ford and just thought he was just like the ideal of a man. And, Harrison Ford is, married, 2 kids, 14 years her senior. And you just kind of wonder just how much of that was channeled whenever she says, I love you, and she's all desperate, and he just looks at her like he's not leaving his wife in real life. He didn't, and he's like, yeah, I know, shut up, like I'd be curious to know how difficult that came to them to do. I mean, I know it's just genre film, but still, you feel like there might have been some underlying tension there in that bit. I just kind of dug that when I was watching that again. And as far as the end bit goes, the actual scrap itself, I think they did a really good job, like you say, of like Luke acquitting himself. I'll tell you, Luke obviously should have spent more time less time running to Toshi Station for power converters, more time playing dodgeball, because the second Vader starts chucking stuff at him, he loses the fight and loses his composure altogether. And you're right, the screen did sort of diminish him a little bit, but like you say, emotional. But I wish I just could have been there to see it in the movie theater and have the OMG moment that everyone else got seeing it for the first time, because hearing it in the schoolyard and seeing it and reading about it in the books and all the rest of it and knowing all this going into this because you've seen a Jedi, what a moment for people who were there in the movie theaters. Like, I can't even imagine something that we've had close to that since. Maybe Blair Witch, maybe something like that, when that came out and people didn't know whether to believe it because, people didn't trust the internet the same way or didn't use it the same way. What a spoiler though. That's pretty awesome. And such a melancholy end. What a way to wrap it up. So much in the air, so much you don't know about, and there's still the specter of Vader looming over everything. As Luke is sort of nursing his wounds. Oh, just chills. Like, I really, really did regret and almost resent watching them out of order. It's hard for me to resent. I was so young, but yeah, even then, the loss was palpable. I felt it. Like, man, I would have killed to see this the way it was intended.
So here's kind of an interesting way to wrap this up. I don't know if either one of you have heard this before, but Joss Whedon did not like the way this movie ended. In fact, in his mind, it wasn't a real ending. He had an interview with Entertainment Weekly where he said, Empire committed the cardinal sin of not actually ending, which at the time I was appalled by, and I still think it was a terrible idea. And then he's asked, you think Empire had a bad ending? He goes, well, it's not an ending. It's a comeback next week or in 3 years. And that upsets me. I go to movies expecting to have a whole experience. If I want a movie that doesn't end, I'll go to a French movie. That's a betrayal of trust to me. A movie has to be complete within itself. It can't just build off of the first one or play variations. So do you see that? Do you understand that? Or do you even agree with the fact that it didn't have an ending? Because I look at Empire, for all intents and purposes, 4, 5, and 6 is the movie. But they're not going to drop a 6-hour film in the theaters. So it's just like Deathly Hallows 7 and 8, or part 1, part 2. I mean, to me, as far as an episode, it is episode 5. I don't remember how soon they started calling these episodes, but as far as the story, the self-contained story that was told in that film, I don't know. I guess, but I didn't find myself thinking that I hadn't gotten an ending. I knew there was more to come, but surely this isn't the first time that's ever happened. What do you think about... keep in mind, Joss Whedon is the same guy who, after making $1 billion at the box office, complained about capitalism. So, it's not like he hasn't said something screwy before. But, what do you think about that?
Well, I would say, I see his point, because you have so many ends left hanging. What happens to Han? What happens to Leia? You're leaving it with so much unwrapped up. And so I can see it's not truly an ending, but I think too, it also reinforces the seriousness of what's going on, because the other thing is the Empire has the upper hand at this stage of the game. The Rebels are in trouble. That sets it up. With it being the middle act, you've got to create the gravity so that you have the payoff at the end, which is, to me, the best payoff of a movie series. And how much sweeter the victory is in Return of the Jedi because of what's happened in Empire Strikes Back. I don't think Return of the Jedi is as strong as it is if you don't have the seriousness and the gravity of the situation in Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, that's very true. I would also say that you look at the lineage of where the Star Wars movies come from. You look at Flash Gordon, you look at Buck Rogers. We're looking at the original moving pictures things from the 40s back in the day. Even something which I think is probably a little bit more in pop culture canon, Batman 1966, always had that kind of, the cliffhanger, always had and what happens next to our intrepid heroes? Will so-and-so do this? Will this person do that? Come back next week. And it kind of feels a little bit like that, in that you know that, okay, so this confrontation is over and done with, but like you say, they're licking their wounds. The Empire is strong. They're looking out over the galaxy at the end, and you know their group is shattered into pieces, and they're looking out over the star systems, and you know the Empire run them all, and you just see them alone in the window, and you see the expansiveness of the galaxy, but how small their little group is. And you know the huge flotilla and the fleets and everything, they're not there. It's only a few ships at the end, and you're like, okay, so yikes, what happens? How are you going to get out of this one? And I think if there is a sin, it's just that you know that the next movie isn't coming out for ages. But that doesn't mean it's a bad ending. I remember Dave Grohl, once upon a time, from the Foo Fighters, he said the best way to end an album, and the only way he likes to end his albums, is with a song that fades out, because he wants to know that when he's listening to that person who's been rocking with his, you know, his metal horns up in the air for the last 45 minutes, that once he's done listening to this record, he's still rocking. That's what he does. He's a rock star. It goes on forever. And I get that the ending that isn't an ending, because it's continuing, it's still happening, it's still in motion. These events, you know, they're so powerful, and you know, you don't want that feeling to end in a way. So I do dig it. I love the tension. I only love it more the older I get. I appreciate it that much more, because it really is such a dirty place to leave it, really, when you're a kid, and it's like, you know, this is the whole gut punch. You're like, oh, what happens next? And it's delicious, the payoff. It really is. It's like being at the peak of the roller coaster, but it's the end. Like, oh my God. So, you know, if anything, it just, I think, whets your appetite for the next one. It's no worse than having people turn to ash in Infinity War, and I was a big fan of that too, you know?
That's a good analogy, because Infinity War and Endgame, it's a similar sort of thing. Endgame, you know, even though there's some sad things in there, but the victory isn't as good if you don't have what happened in the prior episode of Infinity War.
Awesome. Well, this was a lot of fun. I'm so glad we got to talk about this just a few days after Star Wars Day, celebrating the 40th anniversary of The Empire Strikes Back. And I want to thank you for joining us for today's conversation. And we will be back next week to talk more about Disney Plus programming. Specifically, we'll be talking about Prop Culture, the new series featuring props from several of the different Disney movies, and some of the cool props and how they're found, and some of the ones that still exist, and some of the ties to not only the productions but the actors and designers themselves. We've started watching it and we're already having a lot of fun, so can't wait to talk about that next week. We are on Twitter at Disney Plus Cast and online at DisneyPlusStreamcast.com. We have all the episodes there. We have updates as to what's coming, and you can contact us there for any reason if you would like to do that. If you are subscribed to the show, thank you so much. We encourage you to share what you think of the show, especially if you like it, because that's one of the ways that people find it, and they get to hear what listeners think about the programming. But thank you so much for listening to the show today, and we hope you'll be back next week as we get together again for another episode of the Disney Plus Streamcast.